Elden Ring? Oh, Elden Ring. There are too many bosses in Elden Ring to rank them all in one video. There are 3 different levels of boss fights in the game: the field boss, the mini boss, and the main boss. As a result, if you were to total up all the main bosses from Demon Souls all the way to Sekiro, you'll still have less bosses than the amount in Elden Ring. This isn't including Chalice dungeons from Bloodborne or the mini bosses from Sekiro, but even then it's not a massive difference. That's how unbelievably large Elden Ring is. Considering it took 3 years between the release of Sekiro and Elden Ring, and we're 2 years after Elden Ring's release, with the DLC to be released in June, as of the time of writing, I can only imagine what they have planned for Shadow of the Erdtree. Considering they have to contend with Artorias of the Abyss, the Old Hunters and the Ringed City, we can only hope they knock it out of the park. One thing that made those DLCs so good is that the boss battles were mostly a level higher than the quality of the main game bosses, so not only will Elden Ring's DLC have to contend with the other DLCs, but also its bosses will have to prove themselves to be as good, if not better, than the bosses in the main game. And judging by the first looks of Mesmer the Impaler, FromSoft seem to be well on the way to doing just that. With that in mind, which of the 15 main bosses in the game set a standard of quality, and which showcase the things that FromSoft should not do? Also, I can't stress this enough, but this list is ranking the bosses based off the entire presentation, not just the fight. This includes soundtracks, the way they look, the runbacks if there are any, how good the lore is, how unique the boss is, and how important the fight feels. We will still be looking at things like difficulty, balance, arenas, and of course the fun factor, but they are merely one part of my metric, rather than the whole thing. With that out of the way, let's rank them. Also, please do like and subscribe to the video. It's completely free and it will help me very, very much. Also comment on what your ranking is for the Elden Ring bosses. Number 15, Estelle, Natural Born of the Void. The best part about Elden Ring is that their main bosses are mostly good to great, which puts them on average a higher level than the bosses in any other game. That being said, Estelle should have been a lot better than this. Just think about it. A cosmic entity, which is a secret boss in the Grand Cloister, past the worst part of the game, the Lake of Rot. A bad area can either be elevated by a good boss, like Quelaag in Blighttown, or they can make a good boss a lot worse to fight, like Dark Lurker in the Dark Chasm of Old. Estelle is closer to the latter than the former, though not nearly as bad. The runback of Estelle contains one of my least favourite things: loading screens. Not counting any stakes of Marika, the runback for Estelle starts at the Grand Cloister site of Grace, where you have to drop down ledges, cross a river of Scarlet Rot, then follow it to a coffin that you have to enter, and then a loading screen, and then you're at the Fog Gate. Doesn't sound like a lot in the grand scheme of things, but considering the enemies you'll also have to pass, which have range attacks, and Scarlet Rot is the worst status effect in the game. The reason why I say not counting any stakes of Marika is because you could leave this boss and come back another time, but you can't walk to the stake of Marika, and so you have to traverse the level again. Not to mention any extra loading screens you have to endure after death are nothing short of a waste of time. That being said, the fight itself is, well, it's okay. The soundtrack is underwhelming in my opinion, and everything else about the fight is completely down the middle. The reason why it's at the very bottom, however, is that the Stars of Darkness version is found in a random ass cave, and it's a lot tougher than this version. It even has an extra attack for phase 2, which makes me wish that they combined both versions into this one fight. The best thing about this fight is that you can progress the Rani questline, and you get the Moonlight Greatsword. Other than that though, it's not exactly a boss fight I would go out on my way to replay. Number 14, Regal Ancestor Spirit. The soundtrack for this boss makes me want to go to sleep, but the run back is a lot better than Estelle's. The arena is beautiful, and it's a tougher version than the normal Ancestor Spirit boss fight. The fact that this is pretty much a repeat boss is what makes it this far down on the list, but at least it's more difficult than the mini-boss version, and has a few more moves. Take note, Estelle. My thoughts on this fight is pretty much the same as the fight with Estelle, but the quality of life improvement between the two is what puts it slightly higher. You're not exactly enduring Scarlet Rot to make your way to this boss. Number 13, Renala, Queen of the Full Moon. A main boss that's also a gimmick fight. We're also 3 for 3 on magic based boss fights. They have different movesets, but the feeling I get from them is very similar. The run back for Renala isn't good, but not as bad as Estelle's. Definitely the best soundtrack of the 3 so far, and Renala's place in the lore is fantastic. That's what puts it a level above the other two, but I just want to say, screw Renala for summoning the most annoying enemies. It could be wolves, it could be a Bloodhound Knight, it could be a Stone Digger Troll, or it could be a bloody dragon. This boss is designed to test your patience in a way, as you can't just face tanker attacks, unless you have an OP build, but we're just looking at a normal build here. This means you have to time your attacks carefully and save enough stamina to avoid a magic. If the run back was better, if the enemies Renola summoned weren't annoying, and if phase 1 felt less like a chore to get to phase 2, Renola would be much higher on the rankings. But as it stands, she's the 3rd worst main boss in the game. But once again, Elden Ring is a level above most others. Number 12, Fire Giant. Thank God for Torrent. Without Torrent, this would be the absolute worst boss fight. It's not completely without BS still, especially phase 2, but at this stage in the game, even a new player will have a decent build to go up against a Fire Giant. In a sense, this is the type of giant boss fight that Dark Souls 3 fans wanted to have against Yorm, but I still think that fight is better than this one. There's not really much to say about this fight, but it's pure spectacle, and it's mostly solid. This boss tends to be all over the place in terms of people's opinion on him, and there is a small jump between this and the number 11 spot, but the Fire Giant is still an okay boss. Number 11, Lich Dragon Sax. For a pretty good dragon fight, it's surprisingly low on the list. Let's get the positive out of the way. It looks cool, the soundtrack is straight fire, and the run back is almost non-existent with the exception of the loading screen. The thing that really drags this fight down is that a lot of the moves are exactly the same as the normal dragon bosses like Agil and Lanciax, which really take away from the uniqueness of the boss. Also, it kind of sucks that you have to go through fierce champions before you can face them. It just feels like an extra hoop in what is already a tedious quest to the boss. Everything else is pretty mid-tier. It's an optional boss in the mid to late game, so chances are the player has a very strong build to make Sax seem a little underwhelming. The lore is better than all but one of the dragons in this game, but even then it's quite basic. The arena is a big open space, which is good, but it's the same arena as fierce champions, and it feels like a slightly worse version of the Dark Eater Medea boss room. With all that being said, I still had a fun time fighting this boss, even though Lich Dragon Sax feels like a much smaller deal than he really deserved to be. Number 10, Ragon of the Golden Order / Elden Beast. I love Ragon. I hate Elden Beast. We all agree on that, right? So I can move on? No? Okay then. Lore-wise, Ragon is the most important character in Elden Ring, as he and Marika are one and the same. The main difference is Marika was looking to shatter the Elden Ring, and Redon was looking to keep it in one piece. If you look at the E3 trailer for the game in 2019, you can see that's exactly what's happening. Marika is using the hammer to shatter the Elden Ring, and Redon is breaking apart trying to keep it together. This makes Ragon of the Golden Order the perfect final boss on paper, up there with Gwyn in Dark Souls, Soul of Cinder in Dark Souls 3, Ishin in Sekiro, and Gehrman in Bloodborne. Mix this in with his soundtrack being a version of the main theme, and this boss is cooking. He's incredibly tough, even more so because of his immunity to bleed and high resistance to poison, frostbite and scarlet rot, which makes this an endurance fight for the ages. It also helps that while he's a humanoid boss with holy magic, there is actually no other boss quite like him in the game. And then there's Elden Beast. There are next to no bits of lore which even imply this thing even exists. To quote Andy Farrant from Outside Xbox, this thing looks like an MRI of the Loch Ness Monster. The attacks it dishes out are so cheap, and the fact that it's immune to literally everything makes it even worse. After the thrill of the Ragon boss fight, here's a slow, cheap, pointless damage sponge that would have been a lot better as an entirely separate optional boss like the Moon Presence. It's like a slightly less version of Rom the Vacuous Spider, and even then, at least you had the certainty of even reaching Rom before she teleported away. Genuinely, the worst part about Elden Beast is that you spend most of the time trying to just get to it, and its high immunity, damage negation and total HP just drag this fight on and on and on. You go from a legit top 5 boss fight in the game with Ragon, the rush you always crave in a boss fight, to the absolute worst boss in the game with Elden Beast, the slow crawl to the finish line that can kill the end of a fantastic game. Number 9, Star Scourge Redon. Initially, I had Redon roughly in the same level of quality as Sax, but upon a second playthrough I found him to be better than I remembered. The worst part about Redon is that even though he's recommended to be the 3rd main boss you face, after Godric and Renola, you still run the risk of being severely underleveled for him. This takes a severe knock on both the fun and balance of the fight, even though he's entirely optional. In terms of run back, this is either mid or terrible depending on where you're spawning from. If you spawn from the Stake of Marika, you have to endure a loading screen to get to the arena, and you know how I feel about that. But even then, it's not bad. However, if you spawn at the Site of Grace, you have to go talk to the NPC every time to skip through a cutscene, every time. Then you go down the elevator, which will take you to the loading screen. For a run back that has no enemies, it's still able to be a complete waste of time. These two flaws are merely circumstantial, but what isn't is its comet attack. On the one hand, it's pretty cool and the best spectacle moment of potentially the whole game. On the other hand, it will almost certainly insta-kill you, which is my least favourite thing about any and every boss fight with this mechanic. The upside, however, is that it can be entirely avoided if you do enough damage to him. I got him down to 5% health before he took to the skies for the second phase, and I was barely high enough level to face him. Now that I got all the negatives out of the way, let's talk about the positives. In terms of design, Redon is a balance of really f***ing cool and really f***ing ridiculous. Massive man on a tiny horse is just a hilarious concept, and it's shocking that they managed to not make the fight itself a joke of this design. The absolute best thing about this fight, in my opinion, is the lore. First off, Redon loves his horse so much that he practices a form of magic to still be able to ride him while being that huge. That's just adorable. Secondly, this man is so powerful, he's holding back the bloody stars while having no feet, and still needs an entire festival of warriors to put him down. It's funny to me how Millennia brags about never knowing defeat, and yet she fails to mention how she never decisively won against Redon, who says nothing and just proves himself. Remember that scene where he's waiting with his arms folded for Millennia to put her sword arm back on? That says a lot more than Millennia's dumbass bragging ever will. And to top the century off, Redon has one of the best looking armors and weapons in all of FromSoft. Number 8, Godric the Grafted. There is nothing bad about this fight, and the only thing that can be considered mid is the arena. Other than that, Godric is brilliant. The title grate is right outside the fog gate with no loading screen. The design is one of the most insane things that came out of the first looks of the game. The soundtrack is good, and turns to straight dragonfire when phase 2 begins. And both cutscenes are jaw-dropping. Just like Redon, you can entirely avoid phase 2 if you kill Godric fast enough. But if you don't, the difficulty isn't too bad. After Morgot wiped the floor with players, we needed a big fight feel for the main boss. And we got that and then some with Godric. He's probably the least important demigod in terms of lore, so it makes sense that he'd be the first. But that lore is still fantastic. Formerly known as Godric the Golden, he was driven out of the capital after Millennia defeated him. He's also referred to as the weakest of the demigods, which is like Umbrasil being referred to as the weakest dragon of the Chroma Conclave. Critical Role references to one side, Godric is everything he needed to be as a boss, and I have a lot of enjoyment fighting him. Number 7, Morgot the Omen King. You can switch Godric and Morgot on this list, and I wouldn't blame you. The reason why I placed Morgot higher is simply due to the way Morgot is portrayed in comparison to Godfrey. Morgot is the first major mini-boss you come across, and his moveset is similar, but also very different to Morgot. Morgot also comes back as a regular enemy before you enter Leyndell, which adds to the lore of Morgot. Godfrey is unfortunately the complete opposite. His moveset is exactly the same as phase 1 Godric, and Godfrey isn't a mini-boss, he's a field boss, the lowest rank. And what are the lore implications for Godfrey being here? Well, there are none. If anything, it takes away from Godric because even the most unique looking boss has a copy. Back to Morgot, he guards the Elden Throne as a final line of defense, which is why he created his Morgot avatar, so we can keep an eye on the potential threats, such as the foul, tarnished. If you kill Morgot before you even arrive at Stormveil Castle, Morgot won't even be there, nor will he appear in the capital outskirts. That attention to detail is what makes this boss so great. In addition, he's one of the 2 bosses you have to kill to see the 3 fingers. This is a lot to say that Morgot is potentially the most important character in the first half of the game. With all that said, how about the fight? While the run back is barely noticeable, the arena is fantastic and the opening cutscene is awesome. At first you think it's going to be just another Morgot fight, then he breaks his cane to reveal a rad as sword. From then on, the fight is so much fun, and matches the kind of spectacle you want from a main boss. The only drawback you can probably have with this fight is that it's the 3rd time we face a version of this guy, and faced it can be a bit much. Even then, I think Morgot earns the right to be this epic, considering he's pretty much the boss that transitions the player to the second half of the game. Number 6, Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. The next 4 fights are interchangeable. This can be number 3 as much as it is number 6. The reason why I placed Rykard in the last position is because of 2 things. Firstly, even though this is the best gimmick fight we've ever had, it's still a gimmick fight. Secondly, after getting to phase 2 several times, it can make the God-Devouring Serpent phase a bit of a chore to get through on repeat attempts. Other than that, this is where we get to the quality of bosses that Shadow of the Erdtree needs to live up to. The The Storm Ruler of this game is fittingly the weapon that looks like the nameless King's sword spear, which I love. This fight genuinely feels like you've gone to hell to fight the devil himself, which is only the first time I'll be saying that today. The voice acting for Regal is also perfectly disturbing. It's become a running joke between my friend and I that we randomly say "together" because of this boss. All in all, this fight is living proof that you don't need to use the same formula of a boss fight to make for a memorable boss. You just need to have an idea and execute it well. Number 5, Millennia, Blade of Mikla / Goddess of Rot. The worst part about this boss is that she has 3 different mechanics that add artificial difficulty, and no other boss leading up to Millennia really prepares you for her. These 3 mechanics are Life Steal, Waterfowl Dance, and the Scarlet Rot Nuke. Funny how she had 3 of the most overpowered mechanics a boss can possibly have, and yet she still couldn't beat Redon. Brag more about never knowing defeat, idiot. It reminds me of Shangri-La's overuse of bosses in Call of Duty Zombies, where 1 or even 2 would be okay, maybe even good, but having all 3 breaks the experience in half. All that being said, I still love the idea of Millennia being the ultimate challenge for the veterans, and at least the Site of Grace is right outside the Fog Gate. The Phase 1 soundtrack is pretty good, but Phase 2 is when the music really starts cooking. Lore-wise, Millennia is practically everywhere in the world of Elden Ring. Her fights with Godric and Redon have already been mentioned, and as the blade and twin sister of Mikla, that immediately links her to the Elden Throne, and by extension Morgot and Godfrey. Mikla's presence in Mohgwyn's palace also gives Millennia a link there, and while I've been mocking Millennia's estranged relationship with defeat, she can still back up her words without the cheap tactics. In the evolution of tough girl bosses in FromSoft, starting with Lady Maria in Bloodborne, and then evolving to Sister Fried in Dark Souls 3, there is a very valid argument that Millennia is a step too far, but the presentation of this fight is still phenomenal. It's very fitting that the arena is a field of flowers, as that's where the most epic boss fights take place, from Gehrman to Soul of Cinder to Ishin. All in all, Millennia had the potential of being the very best boss in the game, but I guess she'll have to settle for being the hardest in FromSoft, even if I had more trouble against the Orphan of course. Number 4, Malth, the Black Blade. I heard this fight get compared to Slave Knight Gale before I even got Elden Ring. Needless to say, my expectations weren't just high, they were astronomical. I wanted this fight to be S tier so desperately, and yet it's only number 4 in the main game. Like Millennia, Malth has a form of lifesteal which takes away from the boss. Millennia gains health after every hit, and while Malth doesn't, it still drains your health after the first hit. This can make the fight borderline BS, as you spend more time trying to find a healing window and avoid getting hit from this fast as boy. Also, the Beast Clergyman phase can be a complete and utter pain in the ass. The Draconic Tree Sentinel before the boss can make the already tedious run back even worse. When you do kill it, you still have to endure the long run to the Fog Gate. All that to one side, Malth is still an epic battle. I said Redon has one of the coolest outfits and weapons in FromSoft, but Malth might be the best. And seeing this big, weird lion wolf beast in the most epic armor with the coolest sword flying around the arena is just visually satisfying. Speaking of which, this is the first time we've seen the boss interact with the arena since the Guardian Dragon in Dark Souls 2, and they improved on it significantly. If the health drain wasn't a constant thing throughout the battle and left to just one attack, I'd be a lot happier with this fight. If the Site of Grace was right outside the Fog Gates, I'd be a lot happier with the experience. As a matter of fact, if these 2 things were to happen, Malth would be my number 1, but because of these 2 flaws, it stands just outside the top 3. Number 3, Dragon Lord Plac Sax. Runback's a bit dumb, as is the loading screen you have to go through every time you die, but other than that, Plac Sax is the best dragon fight we've had since Medea, and my 3rd favourite dragon boss just below Medea and Calamite. One thing this fight has over those 2, however, is spectacle. Hawkeye shooting down Calamite was amazing, and being the one to knock down Medea was even more so, but the way they went about creating the moveset for Plac Sax blows it out of the park. Lightning, golden fire, teleporting and flying like a half-scourge Redon. It all comes together to make Plac Sax seem insurmountable, but then you beat him, and god damn is it satisfying. Lore-wise, it's believed that he was the Elden Lord before the appearance of the Erdtree, and there are theories suggesting that the Ancient Dragon Smithing Stone and Somber Ancient Dragon Smithing Stone both come from Plac Sax himself. That's pretty cool, considering the lore for most dragons across the series don't tend to be that much more complex than Big Scary Boy. Also, fun little theory here. The Dragon King's Crag Blade that you can get when ascending the soul of Plac Sax is apparently a reference to Dark Souls 1, where you can get a weapon from cutting off a dragon's tail. Before Elden Ring, you can comfortably say that the big 3 dragon boss fights in From Software are Black Dragon Calamite, Sid the Slumbering Dragon, and Dark Eater Medea. Their biggest similarity is that they're optional DLC dragon bosses. While OST Sax is main game, you can comfortably say that he's turned that big 3 into the big 4. Number 2, Godfrey, first Elden Lord / Horaloo, Warrior. If you were to mix Redon's Sigma Chant energy with Morgot's duty to guard the Elden Throne, you'd get this boss. We fought the gold shade version of Godfrey before we even reached Morgot, so having the real deal be the one to replace Morgot makes a lot of thematic sense. In the first cutscene that plays, Godfrey is seen cradling his son, Morgot, who we killed. Oops. He then turns to face us, wielding his axe with a goddamn lion over his shoulder. The fight begins and the music is regal and epic. We're basically fighting a souped up version of the Golden Shade variant, with extra moves and an even bigger wind up to his stomp AoE. Then you get him down to half health. When the cutscene plays, you initially think that you have to fight Godfrey alongside his lion Sirosh. Turns out, Sirosh was deliberately trying to hold Godfrey back, and so Godfrey thanks him for his services and kills him with his bare hands. He also somehow finds the time to take off his shirt and show off all his muscles. I'd be intimidated if the whole situation didn't feel so camp with the
"Now I fight as Horaloo, Warrior!"
Phase 2 still cooks though, and for the penultimate fight of the main game, I think this was a perfect fit. Maybe he could have done with being a little harder, but that's just me saying that after using a summon and Moonveil straight after beating Millennia, so that's all up in the air. Regardless, Godfrey is awesome, Horaloo is awesome, and it feels so good to fight this mighty warrior who is the first Elden Lord. But sometimes, you don't want to face a heroic fighter. Sometimes you want to take down evil. Number 1, Mohg, Lord of Blood. This fight genuinely feels like you've gone to hell to fight the devil himself. Told you I'd be saying that more than once. Sadly, we haven't got any S-tier Elden Ring bosses yet, in my opinion at least. Hopefully we'll be getting 1 or 2 from Shadow of the Erdtree, but that's a problem for another time. Mohg comes very close however. If his run back was shorter, maybe he'd be S-tier. If his lore didn't completely disgust me, maybe he'd be S-tier. It is really down to the little issues that prevent Mohg from being considered one of the GOATs in my eyes, but he's still a phenomenal boss. He has the best soundtrack in the game, barring the main theme and final battle, and after literally hundreds of bosses which mostly seem morally grey, having a purely evil villain as a boss was satisfying. It also justified his cheap tactics, unlike a certain Blade of Miquella. Everything about Mohg just screams villain, and I would have it no other way. Phase 1 is very similar to the Mohg the Omen fight in the Leyendale sewers, but very few people will have experienced that considering how tough it is to find. The primary difference is that throughout Phase 1, the Lord of Blood will be counted down from Tres to Duo to Unus. Then Phase 2 begins, and I know people have problems with this mechanic, but to me this is the only time it works. Everybody's gangster until Satan yells "Nihil" 3 times. Like Redon and Godric before, Mohg's second phase can be avoided entirely with enough damage dealt. If not though, expect to either die by the transition or lose some flasks while Mohg heals. He only uses this move once, which is what makes it so much better than Malthus and Millennia's. Also, there's a tier that you can put in your physic to negate a lot of the damage, so there's that. I also love how he gets black feathered wings in the transition. It really adds to the idea that Mohg might be the actual devil of Elden Ring. Having Miquella just chilling out here is another nice touch, and it's probably going to be the way that we access the DLC. Whatever happens in Shadow of the Erdtree, From Software have a high bar to clear with Mohg, but it's not like they haven't been able to clear that high bar before. Do you agree? Let me know how you'd rank these bosses in the comments. Also, tell me what kind of boss battles you'd like to see, because frankly I would love to discuss it. While you're at it, please like the video and subscribe for more. Until next time, my friends.
Together we will devour the very core.